Hello, welcome to Bible Class Topics today. Another addition to our topical sermon playlist. Another sermon of R.C. White. Be an example. 1 Timothy 4:12. Let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, in purity. There's a value in an example. There's a value in a pattern. Good examples should be followed. In Exodus chapter 40, we see Moses raising the tabernacle for the first time. When you read Exodus 40, it's not exactly clear whether Moses himself did all the work or whether he directed the work. But regardless, for the tabernacle to be set the first time, Moses was the good example. And then the children of Israel, specifically the Levites, were to follow his example. In 1 Peter 5, verses 1 through 4, Peter encourages the elders among you. He says, I exhort you elders, who am a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. He tells these elders to shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly, not as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. So there is value in a good example. When we see a good example, we need to follow it. Meanwhile, bad examples need to be avoided. One example that is not a good example is Samuel and his sons. Reading from 1 Samuel chapter 8, the first 4 verses, Now it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of the second was Abijah. And they were judges in Beersheba, but his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain. They took bribes, and they perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, Look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. So the children of Israel saw that Samuel's sons were not going to be a good example to follow. Unfortunately, they also made a mistake when they encouraged Samuel to anoint them a king. Another bad example that involves Samuel is the choosing of King Saul. King Saul was chosen, at least partially, for his looks. Meanwhile, David was chosen for his heart. In 1 Samuel 16:7, But the Lord said to Samuel, Do not look at his appearance. And this is when Samuel was out looking to find a replacement for Saul. He says, Do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as a man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So outward appearance is generally a bad example. We have to look into a man or woman's heart to see what they're really like. 2 more verses in our introduction. James 4:4, Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Then the Apostle John said this in 1 John 2:15 through 17. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. Who have been important guideposts in our own lives? Our parents, our teachers, our neighbors, our ministers, our friends, our co-workers. Who have been our good examples? Who have been our bad examples? We want to talk about 5 ways we can be good examples as we walk the Christian walk. And of course, this sends us back to our original passage that we read at the beginning, 1 Timothy 4:12. We want to talk about being an example in word, in deed, in love, in faith, and in purity. Here's some passages that we want to reference concerning being an example in word. In Matthew chapter 12, Jesus was not happy with the scribes and the Pharisees. He told them, brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So if we are to be an example in word, we have to speak true things, not evil things. In Ephesians 4:29, let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it might impart grace to the hearers. And in Colossians 4:6, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. 1 Peter 4:12, if anyone speaks, let him speak as the oracles of God. If anyone ministers, let him do it as with the ability which God supplies, that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom belong the glory and the dominion forever and ever. Amen. And we'll reach back into the Old Testament and take a look at Psalm 19:14. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. We need to be an example in word. We need to be an example in deed. Proverbs 4:23. Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it springs the issues of life. And then in Proverbs 23:7, for as he thinks in his heart, so he is. Eat and drink, he says to you, but his heart is not with you. Matthew 15:18, but those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus told his listeners, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. We need to be an example in love. Matthew 22:37 and 38. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus told his disciples in John 13:35, by this all will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. And he said in John 15:13, greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. In 1 John 5:3, the apostle said, for this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. And of course, the love we're talking about here is the Greek word agape, A-G-A-P-E, which is looking out for the other person's best interest, putting the other person ahead of ourselves. Now let's take a little longer reading from 1 Corinthians 8, verses 10 through 13. problem here in the Corinthian church is many of these people had come away from idols, and yet the city was filled with idols and with sacrifices made to idols. And much of the meat found in the market was meat that had originally been sacrificed to idols. Can that meat be eaten? Here's what Paul told them. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat these things offered to idols? And because your knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died. But when you thus sin against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. In today's world, there are many people that even consider the fact that they do not want to eat meat. Do we throw this up in their faces? Do we try to play on their conscience? Do we have to try to apply peer pressure? I think in our society, more than meat, the key to something like this that we're trying to think of here is the kind of problem that's caused by alcohol. Do we have a brother that we know is an alcoholic or a drug addict, and yet because we're not an alcoholic and we're not a drug addict, we put that in their face? That is so wrong. That is so much not love. We need to be an example in love. We need to be an example in faith. Romans 10:10. For with the heart one believes unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. In Ephesians chapter 6, Paul talks about the whole armor of God. And part of that armor is the shield of faith. He says, above all, taking the shield of faith with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one. We have to be strong in our beliefs. We have to be strong in our belief concerning Jesus Christ as the Savior. We have to be strong in our belief concerning his death, his burial, his resurrection, and his ascension. We have to be strong in the faith concerning the fact that if he asks us to do something, we don't hem and haw, we don't hedge around it. We do what Jesus wants us to do. We must be examples in the faith as it concerns our belief and as it concerns our actions. One of the most ignorant things that can be said to a child or to a friend is do as I say, not as I do. Instead, why don't we get together with that child, get together with that friend and say, here's what we both need to do. Here is the path we both need to walk. That's living the faith. Finally, we need to be an example in purity. And clean living is effective no matter what our age is. In 1 Timothy 5:2, Paul told Timothy how the older women, I should say, should relate to the younger women. And that the older women need to set the example for the younger women. In James 1:27, the Lord's brother said, pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. Are we taking care of the orphans and widows in the brotherhood, within the church, within our families? That's undefiled religion. That is pure religion. Are we keeping ourselves unspotted from the world? That is pure religion. Are we taking care of our physical bodies as well? It's February 6, 2021. The world is still in the throes of COVID-19. Are we watching out for each other? Are we taking care of our own selves? 1 Corinthians 3:16. Do you not know that you are the temple of God and the Spirit of God dwells in you? If anyone defiles the temple of God, God will destroy him. For the temple of God is holy, which temple you are. We have to remain pure. We have to mind our manners. 1 Corinthians 15:33, do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals. That's from the ESV. Other versions say interpret this verse as evil companionships corrupt good manners. Are we being an example in purity? Are we being an example in purity for our brethren? Are we being an example in purity for our family, for our neighbors, for our loved ones, for our co-workers? Good examples are good for us to follow, but no man is perfect save one. Jesus is our only model of perfection in all things. A few years back, I was teaching in a Christian school, and I was asked to give the talk at chapel, and I was preparing a lesson about a man who had been very successful in the Paralympics. And I was going to use him as an example of someone that, regardless of their situation, overcame that situation. And just weeks before I was prepared to present that lesson, this man was arrested for committing crimes against his girlfriend. I honestly balled up that piece of paper and threw it in the trash. It taught me a good lesson. To use any man or woman as an example comes with problems. But to use Jesus Christ as our model of perfection, as our model of the things that we're discussing in this lesson, our model of believing in the Word, showing our conduct correct, our love, our spirit, our faith, our purity. Jesus Christ is our only model of perfection in all things. About once a year, perhaps at the beginning of the year when people are making New Year's resolution, I try to ask myself this question. If every member of my congregation were just like me, what kind of church would it be? And every year I understand I've got work to do. There are things I need to do, and there are things I need to avoid. And many of them come under the headings that we've talked about in this lesson. We all need to strive to be a good example, and strive even more to stay a good example. Thank you for watching. Thank you for studying with me today. If you have the opportunity, I wish you would like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share a link to this video with your friends, family, and loved ones. Anyone you think could benefit from studying with us. I hope that all is well with you. Let's continue to pray one for another. And until we meet again, may God bless.